he had to make, I think, a dozen phone calls throughout the day. Why? Because he had no authority. He even called Netanyahu, and Netanyahu later said that Vance reported to me, as if he's his subordinate. But and he also said other American leaders report to me every day, which is interesting. You'd think that that would cause outrage in the Western media, but of course it went unnoticed.
A sitting US vice president, nuclear negotiations, called a foreign prime minister. That prime minister then bragged about it publicly, on the record. Western media? Crickets. We need to talk about this.
Which side can't make decisions? Which side lacks authority? In fact, it's much more clear who's in charge in Iran than in the United States.
An Iranian professor on a YouTube live stream just made the most uncomfortable point in 9 weeks of this war. So let's go. Welcome back to ARM Geopolitics. I'm Aaron, and on this channel, we don't just cover the news. We cut through the noise, we dominate the narrative, and give you the analysis mainstream media is too scared to run. Vigilance is our shield, truth is our weapon. Let's get into it.
But Vance, even though he was surrounded by his two Israeli agents, Witkoff and Kushner, but Vance, even though he was surrounded by his two Israeli agents, Witkoff and Kushner, he had to make, I think, a dozen phone calls throughout the day. Why? Because he had no authority. He even called Netanyahu, and Netanyahu later said that Vance reported to me, as if he's his subordinate. But and he also said other American leaders report to me every day, which is interesting. You'd think that that would cause outrage in the Western media, but of course it went unnoticed. So Ghalibaf was sitting there, and Vance was constantly on the phone. So which side is in disarray? Which side can't make decisions? Which side lacks authority?
Professor at Tehran University, media advisor to Iran's negotiating team, and most importantly, he was physically in the room in Islamabad when Ghalibaf sat across from Vance. Not neutral, not pretending to be. I'll cross-check everything he says against US side sources and tell you exactly where I stand. Now, Trump says Iran is collapsing and begging. Marandi was there. Let's find out who's lying. Okay, let me separate what Marandi's framing from what's documented fact, because they're different things and both matter. Documented fact, Ghalibaf led the Iranian delegation to Islamabad. He is the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, the designated lead negotiator confirmed by the Supreme National Security Council. Marandi was there. Documented fact, Netanyahu publicly stated after Islamabad that Vance reported to me. His own words, his own social media. Not a leak, a boast. Now, Marandi describes Witkoff and Kushner as Vance's advisors with Israeli connections. I'm not calling them agents. What I will say is that both men have documented financial ties to Israeli interests, and their presence in US-Iran negotiations has been questioned by multiple American analysts across the political spectrum. But here's the question that every American should be sitting with right now. A sitting vice president flew to nuclear negotiations with Iran. While there, he called a foreign prime minister multiple times. That foreign prime minister then publicly said the VP reported to him. If this happened in reverse, if an Iranian official flew to negotiations and spent the day on the phone with Russia, and Russia's president afterward bragged about it, it would be the lead story on every network for a week. It would be called a scandal. It would be called a betrayal. Instead, nothing. Crickets. A paragraph buried in the news cycle. I'm not telling you what to conclude. I'm telling you the facts are documented. The quote is real and the silence is deafening. The phone call story is just the surface, because Marandi's larger argument, and this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, is that the side Trump is calling in disarray is actually the side that knows exactly what it's doing. Let's look at the evidence for that.
But with regards to Trump, what Trump said, if we look at Washington, the fact that so many generals have been removed and the Secretary of the Navy has just been removed, and the infighting that we see in the United States, and how the public is completely against this war of choice and this murderous war of aggression. I think if there's going to be talk of disarray, then if the leader approves, then that's how things will be. The Supreme National Security Council has, as we all know, the Supreme National Security Council has, as we all know, uh, has made Dr. Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, the person who negotiated with Vance in Islamabad, the representative for and the person in charge of negotiations with the United States. Very clear. It's Dr. Ghalibaf. If ever there's any confusion among Western analysts, all you have to do is show them a picture of Dr. Ghalibaf and say that this is the guy. Don't worry. This is the guy in charge. He, of course, is answerable to the council, the Supreme National Security Council, and of course the leader. But that's it. So he's the person in charge. He makes the decisions. And
hold on, Professor Marandi. I just want to interrupt just because we are going through some connection problems.
yeah, so Dr. Ghalibaf is the person in charge. And so, as you know, it's clear that, in fact, when the delegation, when the Americans and the Iranians both went to Islamabad for the negotiations, that is the only time that the Iranians and the Americans have negotiated directly in recent years. The only time, that single day.
Marandi is making a specific structural argument, and I want to verify it before I react. The Atlantic, April 2026, confirmed that Ghalibaf is the designated Iranian lead negotiator with full authority. No dispute on that. The Atlantic, same report, said Pentagon officials have been, and I'm quoting the Atlantic directly here, hiding the reality of the munitions situation from Trump. The implication is that the President of the United States is making decisions about escalation without knowing the actual state of his own military's capacity. Washington Street Journal, April 2026, confirmed that following the downing of US aircraft over Iran, aides managed Trump's access to the Situation Room during that period. So here's the picture Marandi is describing, and US reporting is partially corroborating. Iran, one designated negotiator, full authority, clear chain of command, makes decisions in the room. US, VP calls foreign prime minister from negotiations, Pentagon hiding munitions reality from president, generals fired before key operations, Secretary of Navy removed mid-war. I'm not saying Iran's system is more virtuous than American democracy. I'm saying in the context of this specific negotiation, at this specific moment, Marandi's structural point holds up, and US reporting confirms it independently. That's uncomfortable, but that's what the evidence says. Here's the structural argument Marandi builds on top of all of that. And this is where he moves from describing the present to predicting the outcome. Because this isn't just about who's more organized right now. It's about who has more to lose.
For Iran, this is a war for survival. For the axis of resistance, it is an existential war. For the United States, it's a war of choice. Trump carried out this war, as Joe Kent rightly said, the head of anti-terrorism and the counterintelligence, right? Counterterrorism. And installed by Trump. When he resigned, he said Iran's no threat. Iran's not making a nuclear weapon, and this war is because of Zionism and the Israeli regime. So for Trump, this is a war of choice. So whether it's the 39-day war where Trump had to back down, or now in this siege that Trump has imposed that goes both ways against Iran and his proxies in the Persian Gulf and the international community, Iran is definitely going to, but also Iran can export some of its oil by, well, either by sea to a degree, but also through land. For many years, Iran was importing oil from Kazakhstan and then re-exporting its own oil on behalf of Kazakhstan through the Persian Gulf. And so railways to Central Asia, to China, they can be used. Of course, it'll be more difficult, more costly, but this is war. And of course, the United States has taken supplies, stolen supplies from Iranians, medical supplies. But, Iran has many borders: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caspian Sea, to Russia, to Kazakhstan, uh, to Azerbaijan, uh, Armenia, Turkey, Iraq. So it's a huge country. It's not like it's not, it's the size of France, Germany, and Britain combined, and a bit bigger too. It's not Russia, but it is a very large country. So again, but at the end of the day, um, the important thing is that the Iranians, for them, they're a resilient people, and this is a voice. This is a war of for survival. This is an existential, and for the United States, it's just another genocide war that they love carrying out, whether it's Cuba or Venezuela, and in particular Palestine, or Syria or whatever. For them, it's a war of choice. People in the United States are, they're angry. They're saying, "Why are we paying a price for a war that you promised us not to get into? Why are we paying? Why is the cost of living getting worse because a genocidal regime is demanding it from us?" So these are questions he has to answer, and he has no answer. But what do people in Iran say? People in Iran say, well, the United States, which has waged an unprovoked war against us, is now trying to starve us. Are we going to submit? No. That's basically how things are. So who is going to win? Who is going to persevere? It's obvious.
War of survival versus war of choice. This sentence has decided every long conflict in modern history. Vietnam, war of survival for North Vietnam, war of choice for the USA. We left after 58,000 dead in 20 years. Afghanistan, war of survival for the Taliban, war of choice for NATO. We left after 20 years and $2 trillion. Iran, 2026. Marandi is making a strategic argument, not just a political one. The logic is airtight. A population fighting for its existence will absorb costs that a population fighting by choice will not. Every strategist from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz says the same thing. And Joe Kent, Trump's own appointee as counterterrorism chief, resigned and said publicly, Iran is no nuclear threat. And this war is because of Israeli interests. Not Marandi, Trump's own guy. Now, let me add the American cost side that Marandi doesn't develop, but I will. We've expended approximately half our precision air defense missiles in 9 weeks. We're producing PAC-3s at 60 per month. The math on war of choice sustainability is brutal. How long does the American public sustain a war of choice when gas prices keep rising, groceries keep rising, and the Pentagon is hiding the munitions reality from the president? But here's what Marandi adds that Johnson didn't cover. What Iran actually did during the ceasefire time. Because the answer changes everything about what a next escalation looks like.
But Iran needed the ceasefire because it had to redesign its defense capabilities and offensive capabilities because it saw shortcomings during that 12-day war. And we saw the results in this war. Even though U.S. firepower is far greater than the Israeli regime, Iran, despite the Israeli blitzkrieg attack, Iran defeated them. After 8-9 days, Netanyahu was begging for a ceasefire because they spent that time wisely, those 8-9 months. And when the ceasefire happened this time around, Iran scored a huge victory, political victory. The world saw that the United States went from demanding unconditional surrender to accepting Iran's 10-point plan. I think that's a huge achievement. But also Iran needed to prepare itself for the next phase. And for Iran, it's much easier to do so because on its own home turf.
Iran was able to consolidate and focus hard on how it's structuring its control over the Strait of Hormuz. And it has been able to rebuild, according to reports that I've seen, it's been able to focus on rebuilding key infrastructure, getting that started. All of which, and then Iran has also announced that during this time, it has not been sitting idly by. It has actually been, as you said, reconstituting its defenses and actually expanding its production of key parts of its arsenal, like ballistic missiles, etc.
So we are where we are, and things could get a lot worse before they get better. But I think there's no doubt that the Trump regime will fail, regardless of what happens. Meanwhile, whether they attack or they don't attack, the global economic crisis gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, I totally disagree with people who criticize Iran for this, especially this round of taking a ceasefire, because
This is the point being most underreported in Western coverage right now. And notice, Marandi is not spinning this. He admits the ceasefire was Iran recognizing its own shortcomings. The claim, during the ceasefire window, Iran redesigned its entire defensive and offensive posture based on lessons from the 12-day war. Result, in the current conflict, Iran performed significantly better facing far greater US firepower. I can't independently verify Iranian internal military restructuring. Marandi has access, I don't. But what I can verify, Johnson's analysis in our last video found Iran's missile and drone performance in this war was substantially more effective than in previous conflicts. That's consistent with what Marandi describes. And here's the strategic implication. If Iran used the ceasefire to get stronger, and the US used the same period to deplete further, then every day of delay doesn't favor Washington. The gap between what America has and what America needs isn't getting smaller, it's getting larger. Marandi says it plainly: home turf. For America, it's an expeditionary operation 7,000 miles away in heat that's about to hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with no safe staging area and a depleted air defense. That's not propaganda. That's geography and physics. Well, this is where I step off. Marandi uses Epstein class to describe US leadership. He calls American pilots brothers in crime with Israeli pilots. He frames all of this as all for the sake of Zionism. I'm not going to use that framing, not because I'm protecting anyone, but because it's analytically imprecise and it lets actual policy failures off the hook by turning them into some kind of cartoon. The documented record is damning enough without the conspiracy overlay. What the record actually shows: the clean break document from 1996, written by American neoconservatives for Netanyahu, laid out a specific Middle East agenda. American administrators across both parties have executed large portions of that agenda. American taxpayers have spent $8 to $10 trillion doing so. Joe Kent, Trump's own counterterrorism chief, resigned and said this war is because of Israeli interests, not American ones. That's not a secret class. That's documented foreign policy capture. And in some ways, it's worse because it's not hidden. It's happening in public with lobbying dollars, with congressional votes, and with public statements in the open, and nobody's stopping it. I'm also not adopting the framing on American pilots. The men and women executing orders are not criminals. They're following a chain of command that has been compromised by bad decisions at the top. The accountability belongs to the decision makers, not the people following orders. That's America first, protecting the troops by stopping the wars that don't serve American interests, not by calling the troops criminals. Okay, so Trump says Iran is starving, collapsing, begging. Marandi says Iran's been here before. Who's right? Actually, both of them, in different ways, and that distinction matters enormously. This is the most honest thing Marandi says in the whole stream.
But one thing I wanted to ask you, Professor Marandi, in addition, if you wanted to comment on this, there have been these reports saying that Iran is running out of places to store its oil. It has only about 2 weeks, about to 21 days, 22 days before it of capacity left, and that the U.S. blockade is having a significant effect in Iran being able to export its oil. This was reported by Bloomberg, and I'm wondering about the veracity of these reports.
But they've chosen the wrong country to try to defeat this time around, the Trump regime, the Epstein class. So yes, life will be definitely, it's going to have an impact on Iranian society, but that's war.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. It is war. Well, one of the things that we're hearing from Marandi, we are hearing that Iran is pursuing land routes, of course, to transport its oil, particularly to China, which is a big, one of the biggest, clients in terms of Iranian oil exports.
But we have to keep in mind that Iran has been here before. Iran, when Trump revived the maximum pressure sanctions, and of course this happened under Obama too, when he started this, because he was the person who initiated the maximum pressure sanctions. But when Trump restarted them, Iran's oil production exports almost went to zero. So it's, we for a couple of years, 2-3 years, we weren't exporting any oil. The little oil that we were exporting was basically oil that we owed to the Chinese for things that they'd done in Iran. So this is something that we have to, keep in mind, that Iran is a country that's been under maximum pressure sanctions for decades. So it is more resilient. And of course, the people are by nature resilient, as we've seen. And the fact that they've withstood all those sanctions and still they won the war. That resilience, I think, and the fact that they've experienced these sort of difficulties before is different than when the global economy, which is not sanctioned, is now going to be facing this crisis. So a sanctioned country that has been through this before can relive this experience more easily than those who have no idea what to do under these new circumstances. But also, Iran can export some of its oil by, either by sea to a degree, but also through land. For many years, Iran was importing oil from Kazakhstan and then re-exporting its own oil on behalf of Kazakhstan through the Persian Gulf. And so railways to Central Asia, to China, they can be used. Of course, it'll be more difficult, more costly, but this is war. And of course, the United States has taken stolen supplies from Iranians, medical supplies. But, Iran has many borders: Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caspian Sea, to Russia, to Kazakhstan, to Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, Iraq. So it's a huge country. It's not like it's not, it's the size of France, Germany, and Britain combined.
Notice he doesn't say the blockade isn't working. He says Iran has survived this before. The world hasn't. Let me put numbers on what he's describing. Under Trump's first term maximum pressure campaign, Iran's oil exports dropped from 2.5 million barrels per day to roughly 200,000, near zero. That lasted 2019 to 2021. The Iranian economy contracted. Currency collapsed. Inflation hit 40%. And they're still here, still fighting, still controlling the strait. Now compare that to the world's exposure. 20% of global oil, 20% of global LNG, 1/3 of global fertilizer moves through Hormuz. The world has never had Hormuz closed this long. Iran has survived near zero exports before. Europe, Japan, South Korea, they haven't. Marandi's point isn't that the blockade doesn't hurt Iran. It's that Iran's pain tolerance is higher than the world's pain tolerance, and the world clock is running faster.
So anyway, any reaction to this? And there's some audience questions that we can get to before we head out of here.
Yeah, just one other point that I want to allude to, and that is that we're in the Persian Gulf region and on the Arabian Peninsula. We're heading towards hot weather, and it's at the end of April, and March is the transition month. Sorry, May. May is the transition month, and by the end of May, it's going to be very hot and humid. And if the Americans want to engage in war, and then they start striking Iranian critical infrastructure, well, they know exactly what's going to happen, and that is going to make it hell on earth for the Americans and those who assist them. So it's and we have to remember that when the Americans invaded Iraq, and also when they invaded Kuwait, um, they did it. I think in I don't. Well, I always work with the Iranian calendar, but I think in January or so, when the weather is cool. The circumstances in the weeks ahead are going to be very, very different. It's already getting warmer, but it's going to get very hot in that area. So it's going to be very tough on American soldiers.
Now let's stop here for a second, because Larry Johnson said this in our last video if you haven't watched. Word for word, military operations in the Persian Gulf become nearly impossible by May. 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Troops need constant water resupply. Water resupply needs air corridors. Air corridors need air defense. Air defense is mathematically exhausted. Now Marandi, from the other side of this war, is saying the same exact thing. When your opponent and your own military analyst agree on the physics of your situation, you listen. This isn't one side making an argument. This is two people on opposing sides of a war describing the same physical reality. The window for any ground escalation is closing in weeks, not months. After May, it's not a military problem anymore. It's a survival problem for anybody wearing body armor in the Gulf in June. Okay, just let me lay this out plainly, no spin, no framing. Just what we actually know happened in Islamabad. Iran sent one guy, Ghalibaf, full authority from the Supreme National Security Council. He walked in, he sat down, he negotiated. Didn't call anyone, didn't need to, because the people who needed to sign off had already signed off before he got on the plane. America sent Vance, and Vance spent the day on the phone. A dozen calls, including one to Netanyahu, who then went on social media and said, and I want to be really clear, this is his quote, not mine, that Vance reported to me. Since then, The Atlantic says Vance has been sidelined from negotiations entirely. Same Atlantic report says the Pentagon has been actively hiding the munitions reality from Trump, meaning the President of the United States may genuinely not know how depleted his own military is right now. So here's what that picture actually looks like from where I'm standing. One side flew to Islamabad ready to make decisions. The other side flew to Islamabad and spent the day reporting to a foreign government. One side's president is being kept in the dark about his own military capacity by his own Pentagon, and the people executing this war, the sailors, the pilots, the soldiers, they're being asked to fight in 120-degree heat with no air defense and no safe staging area. For a policy that the people making the decisions apparently either don't understand or don't care to understand. That's not me reading from Marandi's talking points. That's The Atlantic. That's the Wall Street Journal. That's Netanyahu's own mouth. I'll let you sit with that. So, where do I actually land on Marandi? The Islamabad story. Ghalibaf with full authority, Vance on the phone with Netanyahu, documented, real, and way underreported. The war of survival versus war of choice argument. Johnson said it. Trump's own counterterrorism chief said it when he quit, and the historical record backs it up completely. The blockade. Marandi's being straight with you. It hurts Iran, but Iran's done near zero oil exports before and survived. The rest of the world hasn't. In the 100-degree window, both sides of this war are telling you the same thing about May. That's not spin, that's weather. Where he loses me is the Epstein class stuff, calling American pilots criminals, collapsing everything into all for Zionism. Look, the documented record is already damning enough. The clean break document exists. Joe Kent resigned and named Israeli interests. The money trail is public. You don't need a secret cabal to explain bad foreign policy. You just need lobbyists, campaign donations, and a political class that stopped asking what's actually good for Americans. That's what this has been about across 5 videos now. Not one administration, not one conspiracy, just decades of decisions that served someone else's agenda, while ordinary Americans picked up the tab in blood and treasure. Marandi calls it Zionism. I call it documented foreign policy capture that's happening in public, in plain sight, and nobody's stopping it. Either way, it's not for Ohio, it's not for Texas, it's not for that sailor sitting on that carrier 600 miles offshore wondering what exactly he's out there for. That's the thing I keep coming back to, and that's what we are here to say.